Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are winding down the semester. We have a couple more weeks and then off to regroup and start the spring semester. But in the meantime, we think, what is a very enlightening program today, this being Native American or Indigenous Peoples History Month. It's actually American History Month if we want to get down to it. But I am Mary Texeira. I teach in the Department of Sociology. I am would like to introduce you to the topic today, which is a film that we're going to show about 26 minutes, and it's on Indigenous, murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. So I don't want to delay too much, but as always, we do want to acknowledge the land on which we reside. And with that, I will turn you over to Connie Cornejo, who is a student here at Cal State, and she will acknowledge that land.
Oh, we recognize that California State University San Bernardino sits on the territory and ancestral land of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, Yuhaviatam Serrano people. We recognize that every member of the California State University San Bernardino community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of the land since the institution founding in 1965. Consistently with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold California State University San Bernardino more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous people. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Thanks. And with that, if we can get the film started so that we'll have plenty of time to discuss afterward, and our guests will certainly give us their expertise on what is happening in real time as well as the film. So with that, Finn, if you can start the film, that would be great. And we'll see you all on the other side of that.
Yeah, she's an amazing kid. She was just always trying to help others. And I don't think I taught her to take care of herself.
So it's 10 years on, and you're still searching. You're still searching these streets.
Yep. Still looking.
Across the United States, Indigenous families are searching for their loved ones, for closure.
We would tell each other, what do you think she said? What was her last words, Did she cry for help, or did she pray? Did she shout, I love you, to anybody?
And searching for answers why their family members were taken from them. Fault lines traveled across the U.S. to look at what's behind the crisis of Indigenous women going missing and ask what more could be done to stop it.
Honey was a good person. She didn't deserve what happened to her.
So let's say you have to read an incredibly long email from your boss that you have to finish before the big meeting starts in 10 minutes. Or you're cramming for an exam the night before, but can't bear to keep your eyes open to read one more textbook chapter.
And I want justice for Henny.
We've come to Kent, Washington, just south of Seattle. Tina Russell is showing us some of the places where she's gone to search for her niece, Alyssa.
See, we had search parties through all this area over here, all these woods, because I actually had a dream I found her body back there.
Why do you keep the flyers in the car?
I never know when I need to make copies. I'll meet somebody and talk to them about Alyssa and hand them a flyer. Sometimes it's just the beach in the park. Me and my cousins will go to the beach and just walk along the beach handing out flyers. I'm gonna grab that real quick.
It's been just over 10 years since Alyssa's family saw or heard from her. She was 21.
And so you have the red dress.
Yes, so I made this red dress. I'm eventually going to put a charm on it and put it on a skirt that I'm making for myself right now. No teeth. That is the cutest picture ever, and she did not like this picture. She did not appreciate that picture because of her teeth.
It was a chaotic time for the family back then. Alyssa's mother was dying.
Alyssa's mom is right here, and this is Alyssa's brother, Corey. He lives in Arizona.
We knew she wasn't gonna be there much longer. And I told Alyssa, I talked to her on the phone. She's like, okay, Grandma, I'm on my way. And she, in all the years her mom was sick, she was always there. She wouldn't just go somewhere and not show up. She might be late, but she'd be there.
That was the last time Barbara or anyone from the family spoke to her. A few days later, Alyssa's mother died, and there was still no word from Alyssa.
Everything happened so fast with my sister being sick and Alyssa. It's like there were so many blurs.
We were just thrown into a turmoil.
Did any witnesses come forward?
There was a witness that said that they saw Alyssa talking to somebody in a green truck with out-of-state plates.
That was one of the only leads that turned up after Alyssa was last heard from. A witness said they saw her talking to a man in a green truck at this intersection. Another important development in the case was that the Kent police received a 911 call from Alyssa's cell phone.
The 911 is pretty haunting, actually.
Sergeant Tim Ford was one of the original detectives on Alyssa's case and heard the 911 call.
It almost sounded like she was saying, "Help me."
But the call cut, and police were unable to pinpoint a location.
It just really bothers me, especially with that 911 call. When you listen to it, and you can hear her voice, and you know that that's maybe the last time she was ever spoken. And so it bothers me that we were just never able to get any credible evidence pointing to anybody.
With no answers from authorities, the family, including Alyssa's little brother Jamar, are left wondering what happened.
That's pretty. Whose dog is that?
Mine.
Oh.
Her name is Caesar. A little ankle biter.
If she's still alive or gone.
Every time they find a body, every single time there's a body found on the news, there's a pause. It's literally like you're dead for a moment because you have to wonder, is it Alyssa? I think I've called the coroner more than anybody should in a lifetime.
The family can only search, wait, and hope, including Alyssa's daughter, who was only 3 years old when she went missing.
She had this big string of beads and she would hang it on the door so in case her mom came home, she could hear the beads rattling.
We don't know what happened, so we can't heal.
For relatives of people who go missing, finding closure is often impossible. And stories like Alyssa's are all too common in the United States, where Native Americans go missing at a disproportionately high rate. 2 hours away from where Alyssa was last seen is the Yakima Nation.
We have a very horrible thing that has come to our reservation. A lot of pain and hurt has been done with our people. And our hope and our prayer is that the word is reaching those that need to put the necessary things in place to help those of you that are still looking down the road, looking for your loved ones.
My name is Roxanne White, and I'm from here, and I am Yakima, and I'm Nez Perce, and I'm what you call the main organizer of this event, but I'm more than an organizer. I'm a survivor, I'm a family member. Today this is about our community, our families, our loved ones.
People are meeting here to raise money for the search efforts of Rosunda Strong, a 31-year-old mother of 4 who went missing in October.
She's been missing since then. She'd never leave home without telling us. But I'm gonna be her voice until I find her.
Across the country, Indigenous communities have been trying to draw attention to cases like Rosinda's.
We do find I'm not gonna give up on anybody else either that's here on the Yakima Reservation and still missing somebody.
But advocates and family members have started to raise awareness about the high rates of violence that disproportionately impact Indigenous communities. Part of the problem is that government agencies don't have comprehensive data on how many people in the U.S. are missing.
We can't solve problems we don't check. We can't prevent violence that we don't bother to pay attention to.
Anita Lucasi is a doctoral student who has built a database to keep track of how many Indigenous women in the U.S. and Canada are missing and have been murdered.
Whatever information we get is just kind of handed to us with no context or explanation. And there's never any opportunity to include us in that data collection or analysis process. So really what we're trying to do is find and gather as much information as possible to support tribes and Native communities in making, effective data-driven decisions on how to protect our women and girls.
Anita has documented over 1,800 cases in the U.S. dating back to 1900. But 75% of the cases are just from the past 2 decades.
People ask me a lot, why are Native women going missing or being murdered? What's the reason? And the reality is, unfortunately, there is no one reason. I think the one unifying factor would be colonialism and ongoing colonial occupation. It teaches people, whether Native or non-Native, it teaches folks to undervalue Native women, to see us as less than human, to see us as exotic and sexy and easy to use and abuse.
When you talk to families, are there any commonalities in their experiences with law enforcement?
As the terrorist rebellion enters another year,
I think, one general commonality that most families experience is that law enforcement are not helpful, especially in the beginning hours when it matters most. So whether someone has gone missing or has been killed, usually there's very little communication with families. Families are often not made to feel as if they're being heard.
And I know that these banners are medicine. This making Rosinda visible and making people see her. And this is why we do what we do. Because we want all the families to know that they're not alone.
Every family who has somebody who's missing or who has experienced that at one point or another, they know the scale and the magnitude of that grief and confusion and frustration that comes with the process of trying to search and advocate for a missing loved one. Imagine that tenfold, 50-fold, a million, we don't know. The ripple effect is so much bigger than any of us are even able to measure.
In the backyard, I look up there and think of her, because she always used to be up there. Don't matter what time of day it was, night, she'd be up there, right there. The biggest one between those two. We'd always lose her in the backyard, but that's where we would find her. We wouldn't hear her, but we'd hear her laugh.
One of the most important things law enforcement can do when someone goes missing is to act quickly. That didn't happen in the case of 14-year-old Henny Scott on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Montana.
She was just like this ball of light that was just bing, 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 bing. Yeah.
The last time her mother Paula spoke to her, it was a Friday evening last December. Henny called to ask if she could go to a basketball tournament.
And I told her, no, honey, you can't, you're grounded. And she said, okay, I'll be home in a bit. And that's the last I heard from her.
When Henny didn't come home, Paula first took to social media to ask if anyone had seen her. 5 days later, she and her husband Nathan went to their local law enforcement, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or BIA, a federal agency.
The reason why I was down there is reaching out to them is because I needed help to look elsewhere. And when they told me, you know, did you check her friend's house? Or maybe she's got a new boyfriend, did you check there? Yeah, I checked there. That's why I'm here, because I need more help looking elsewhere.
It's not clear where or even if the police searched for Henny, but what Paula and Nathan do know is that an alert wasn't issued for her until 2 weeks after they reported her missing. By that point, the family had organized a volunteer search party to look for her.
I seen some birds going up and down like that. And was a search party searched on one side and another search party searched on one side. We walked down there and, you know, I could smell it, man. You know, I could smell the death, man. And that's when I got like the feeling of, you know, I need to find her, you know, I need to find her. She's someplace around here.
When it got dark, they called off the search for the night with plans to resume in the morning.
So that's when they found her. They found her, like, where I went down the ravine. They found her up towards the house, maybe about 50 yards from where I was at. And it just felt like I should have went that way, you know. But I know God, you know, he probably didn't want me to see her like that.
And then they brought her down to that tin building where we were at. They just like opened the back of that Suburban. She was already in a body bag, and they just like let us stand beside there and have a moment with her.
Paula and Nathan told us there have been few answers from authorities since Henny was found.
I believe I wasn't taken seriously. That if I had been, that she would be here.
Hi.
It's the kids, the little ones that it hurts the most. Like just like last night, our baby girl was just crying, you know. And she said, Dad, man, you know, I said, what's wrong, baby? My heart hurts, man. You know, I know my heart is breaking, Dad, because Henny's gone, Dad.
The Bureau of Indian Affairs declined our request for an interview, citing the open investigation, which is being conducted by the FBI.
But we get through it, we get through it a lot, because...
It's hard, though.
Yeah, it is hard, but, you know, we want justice to be served, we want the process to work for us.
Do you know where your holiday gifts are right now? This year, choose digital delivery and avoid the shipping stress.
But getting justice for Henny might not be easy. Fighting violent crime and achieving justice on reservations is complicated due to a collision of different factors. One is that most tribal police departments are understaffed and under-resourced.
The whole Navajo reservation, so it goes north to Flagstaff. Grand Canyon this is Grand Canyon.
We've come to the Navajo Nation, the largest Native nation in the United States.
You said there's about 40,000 people that live
in this area, yeah.
That you cover.
Yeah, and that's based on the last census from 2010. I'm sure there's more now, and that's where, you know, if I get a call, not easy, you know, that's a good hour and a half drive for me to get there.
The Navajo Nation stretches across 3 states, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. And its police force is spread thin.
We do investigations. We try to get as much done right then and there. But sometimes we do need to go back and do follow-ups and try to go back and visit people, find people. But then we're still doing our regular patrol duties. On a given night like this, we're just gonna go from call to call to call.
Another factor is that tribes don't have jurisdiction over non-Native Americans for all crimes, aside from domestic violence, a recent change. But beyond that, they also have limited sentencing power, even over members of their own nation for major crimes, including homicide, assault, and kidnapping. What this means is that addressing violent crime is primarily in the hands of the federal government.
In the late 19th century, the federal government imposed itself on tribal nations and said, basically, we don't trust you to police yourselves, and passed laws that allowed them to come into Indian country and do crime control. It was imposed. It wasn't a request of the tribal nations. And yet that's still the law today that governs when a family is going through a crisis.
And I think the way the system is set up is if federal doesn't take it for whatever reasons, then we still can prosecute in tribal court for it. But the maximum they could be given is a year in prison and up to $5,000 fine.
For what? A year in prison and a $5,000 fine for what?
That's the maximum we could do for any of our, like for the homicide charge on the tribal level, that's the maximum right there. You would rather go with the federal level with the FBI and CI.
The problem with the federal authority is that there have been a lot of concerns that the federal agencies don't respond, that they don't take these crimes seriously. Typically, federal officials or federal criminal authority is interested in, white-collar crime and terrorism and immigration and major drug trafficking rings. So when they hear, oh, you need to go investigate a domestic violence offense, there's a sense culturally in the department that that's not my job. I have more important things to do than worry about what's happened to one Indian woman 4.5-hour drive away.
The wait for justice is something Valia knows too well. Her older sister Ariel went missing in the summer of 2017. She was 26. Just a few months later, her remains were found in the canyon below this bridge in Arizona.
This is where my sister was found in October. My mom was the one that just started putting flowers here to remember her and just to get a piece of where she was last found, where she last took her breath, I guess. It's difficult to know that this is known as the bridge to my family. Someone that we used to call our sister, was known as just the bridge.
Even though it's been a year and a half since Ariel was found, Valia told us they only know what they hear from whispers in the community.
The rumors are that she was thrown off and that the people responsible went back down there and cut her in half. And they burned her lower part of the body and they left the upper torso.
Did you find that out from the FBI, or did somebody else tell you that?
Somebody else. It's just rumors. It's just rumors. We don't hear stuff directly from the FBI or the CIA.
So let's say you have to read an incredibly long email from your boss that you have to finish before the big meeting.
It was nearly a year before Ariel's remains were returned to Valia and the family. By that time, their mother, Jacqueline, had passed away.
It impacted her the worst. She was depressed. She would call me and she'd be like, "Hi, sweetie, what are you doing?" "Nothing, Mom. What are you doing?" And she'd be, "Oh, I'm over here at the bridge. I'm spending time with your sister."
At one point, Valia says investigators suggested Ariel had taken her own life.
I said, do you know what happened? Have you guys found the people that did it to her? And then they were like, "Oh, we think it's suicide." And I'm like, "Suicide?" I was like, "That's not impossible." I said, "My sister had no reason to kill herself." She was excited for my pregnancy and to meet the baby. So I told him nope. She had a lot of stuff to live for. And she loved taking selfies with my grandpa. She's the only one that can get him to take a selfie.
Who's this?
That's my son.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she and him shared a close relationship, you know.
Since that initial meeting with authorities, there's been no answers, only questions as to what really happened to Ariel.
The FBI victim advocate, she just tells me that there isn't much evidence to go to her case.
I'm sorry, which one?
Oh, this one is her, my mom, and me.
A lack of evidence is the main reason federal officials give for declining to prosecute crimes on reservations.
That shouldn't be the end of the discussion. There should be then okay, let's see what went wrong in this case, why there's no evidence or why the evidence isn't good enough, and make sure that doesn't happen again, rather than just repeating the cycle over and over and over.
The FBI declined to speak with us about Ariel's case, citing the open investigation.
Justice at this point just seems really far, you know. I want justice for my sister, but it just seems like, you know, the person out there is still out there, you know, around other daughters, sisters, aunts, grandmas. He could do it again. Like, he thinks that no one can convict him of the crime that he did. But I just want to see him off the streets. I don't know who he is, but that's all I want.
One thing that's helped Valia and other families we spoke with is to talk about their loved ones, so people know who they were and what happened to them.
She was a beautiful person, and she cared and loved everyone. And she wanted the best for everybody.
Some states and federal officials have started to take action. New legislation is being proposed with the goal of tracking how many Indigenous men and women have gone missing and to find solutions. It's a small step, but it's one that families hope can prevent others from experiencing the loss they have.
For her to be that young, it was just heartbreaking. I don't know if I could ever recover from this.
You have to be her voice, huh? Because like she said, she was silent out there, but she's gone. She's louder than heck now. Because it brought up a movement, man, that needs to be addressed. Not only in this state, but everywhere else in the country.
I'm one of the fortunate ones that got to find my girl and bring her home. There's some ladies out there that have never found their daughters or sons and never got to bring them home.
People don't know what you're going through on the inside, but there's so many expectations of you like to just move on with life, and you can't. Nobody has sewn the wound closed. The wound isn't closed, so it's getting an infection, and that's what it's doing. Inside of our hearts, it's infected. It's poisoning our spirits. It's causing us so much trauma. We have to keep searching for her. We can't let anything stop us, because if we don't look, who's going to look?
I love that smile. Oh my gosh. Oh, I wish I could see it.
Can I assume that was the end of the film? Okay, great.
I'm just, I will definitely turn over to my colleague Stan Futch, who is from the West Side Action Group. But I just need to say that, you know, these women who are talking about these tragedies in their communities, if we just multiply that times thousands, you know, the pain, the suffering, which can, it's no longer individual, it is community suffering. So I hope you all took that in, and please send questions. We have two wonderful guests today. Mary Valdemar is an instructor at Valley College. Is that right, Mary? Am I saying that correctly?
Actually, I'm not an instructor. I work in the library. I'm part of the Library and Support Services Division.
Okay.
So not in the classroom.
Fantastic, fantastic. But you know what? We're all in the classroom, right? Especially librarians. Librarians are in the classroom for sure. And we also have Jim Fenelon. Many of you within the sound of my voice will know who we're talking about. He is our esteemed professor of sociology, who is away from here now. He's in Pennsylvania, where I imagine it's getting pretty cold. And he's a visiting professor at Swarthmore College in the, I have it written down, he is the Lang Visiting Professor of Social Change at Swarthmore. So, and he has been doing good work on Indigenous communities for all of his career. Jim, remind us who you are from.
So in my Indigenous background, I would go, and greetings to my relatives. And so I am of the Dakota, the Mitawakantawan Dakota, and the Lakota. I'm now saying on the Lakota side that I am the great grandson of Hawape Lutawin, and it actually translates me to respect the law, red woman. I'm enrolled on Standing Rock reservation, and is one of the really leading women elders there that reminds me, said, don't call this a nation because they're not respecting us in that way. And in that sense, whatever voice I bring needs to come after both Native women and other women that have moved into this discourse. And that's really kind of being accepted in most of these circles in that respect. But I'll be glad to help out and suggest for some of the policy issues that have led to this maybe greatest of all injustices. I'll be glad to support as we move forward.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jim. You know, I work in the, I have worked for a number of years in the domestic violence community, and I was just blown away to hear a few years ago, and they do mention that this has changed now, but it was possible to kill a Native woman, to rape a Native woman and otherwise sexually assault her, and not be held responsible if you left the reservation. But the Violence Against Women Act actually took care of that. So, but there is still a problem, it seems like. And of course, on this panel, we're very interested in police response. That seems to be part of the problem. So Stan is going to lead us in, you know, responding to questions from our audience, if you'd like, Stan.
Yeah, and the first thing I'm interested in is, one of the things was said was, even if they're found guilty, the maximum punishment we can give is 1 year.
Yep.
And that seemed to be for everything. So can we talk about that a little bit? Either one.
If I can respond to that a little bit, I think I come to this work as a local organizer who's been involved originally with environmental justice work. And there is a lot of intersection between the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and other people that we're going to talk about a little bit as well, because it's not just women. and really look at the issues of how this intersects with colonization, how this intersects with the residential schools, how this intersects with the issues that we see at the borders and immigration, how this intersects with colonization in general, and looking at the long-term history to understand, like, how did these laws, these random laws come into play, and who do they protect and who do they not protect, and why? And it really calls to question, you know, for us to have a deeper understanding of, you know, how the reservations were created, why they were created, and the land grab and the power struggle that was basically about land and resources and money. And also the genocide of Indigenous, Native, and First Peoples, right? So really looking at how these issues of rape and the exploitation of women are super connected to the exploitation of the land, the exploitation of children, the exploitation of all the things that many of us as Indigenous people hold sacred. And why that is not such a thing in the past, but is currently happening through the court system, uplifting and protecting some of these archaic laws that were not intended for justice, but were intended really to make sure that resources remained in the hands of the powerful and ultimately white supremacy. So, like, you know, really looking at these issues from a decolonial lens and looking at the inherent racism behind them and sexism and patriarchy, and understanding how these things are not separate issues. You know, when we talk about this with women and young girls and femme queer community, you know, we talk about you know, how the acceptance and the promotion of sexualizing of folks is another form of exploitation that we see in the raping of the earth, you know, the extraction of oil, the extraction of natural resources, the pollution of the water, the air. We're here in the Inland Empire where we have the worst air quality in the nation. And most of us in this room did not make the decisions that lead to us not being able to breathe our own air. And this is all part of a very intricate system, but not an accident, a very intentional system that relies on, you know, taking the lives of people of color, especially women, femme, the disabled, LGBTQ, immigrants, all the folks that we see vulnerable, Black community, like, you know, all the folks that we see vulnerable to these laws that have never really been framed around justice, but more about capital.
You know, it strikes me as just in terms of going out a little bit, generalization, that what you just said is so very basic to your history, right? To our history, to American history. You know, the fact that the United States has never honored one treaty that they made with Native Americans. And yet, I know Jim experiences this as well as I in our classes. Our students are angry when they hear this in college for the first time. And this is the whole fight over critical race theory, that, you know, second and third graders should know some of this stuff. You know, we can, you know, just like we teach our kids about sex, we can do it appropriately. We can do it a little bit at a time. But for a child to be, or a person to be 17, 18 years old and get angry because they think we're lying to them. And I know that in the sound of your voice right now, people think, oh, you're exaggerating, you know, this is not really the way it is, et cetera, et cetera. And this is why it's so crucial for us to teach our communities. Even our own people don't know this stuff. Our own people don't know.
I just shared a link, and maybe someone can bring that up on the screen share. I shared it in the chat to the hosts and the panelists, that has a lot of good data about missing and murdered Indigenous women in kind of like an infograph. And I think like the important part to really understand and focus on is that the missing and murdered Indigenous women is not a new thing. You know, if we look at here in California, you know, the mission system, and we look at what happened when missionaries first came to these lands here in California, and what happened to California natives, and we know really clearly the first thing they did was, you know, take children. They took children, and they knew that if they took children, the women would follow, that the mothers would follow their children to the missions. Yes. And then eventually, you know, the men would follow their families, you know, and there was a whole rationale about how to break down the humanity of folks, you know, by, you know, abducting children, by raping women, by, you know, doing whatever they could to dismantle and destroy what was, you know, the lives of Indigenous, Native, First Peoples, and their spirituality, their beliefs, their customs, their language, their everything, you know. And I think like that really goes to a lot of the stuff that we talk about with what's happening to Indigenous, Native, and First Peoples around the world, which is essentially erasure and invisibility. And nothing makes that point more than missing and murdered Indigenous women, because this is not new. Thousands of women disappear every year, and nobody asks. Nobody talks about it. There's no justice. There's no investigation. There's very little attention or light drawn to this. And what we know is that, you know, things that hide in the dark, you know, thrive. That mold festers in the dark. And as soon as light is shined upon it, you know, it can't continue to grow and fester the way it has, you know, when it's hidden and in the dark. So telling the truth about what has been happening with missing and murdered Indigenous women and what has been happening to children and Indigenous people around the world is the number one thing that we can do to change that. If you look at this infographic, you'll see that 69% of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls cases occurred since the year 2000. So even the cases that are existing have only been investigated very recently, you know, in the last 20 years. So what about the cases before the last 20 years? Was it not happening? No, of course it was happening. It was extremely prevalent, but there was no investigation, no desire to even create a case, to even look for folks. 1 in 5 missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls cases occurred in the regions where the KXL pipeline is proposed to be built. 1 out of 5. And if we look further and we follow further pipelines, we see that the same pattern happens in Canada, across Turtle Island, where you find pipelines, you find missing and murdered Indigenous women. And that's because there's a very close tie to something called man camps, where men are brought from all over to work on these pipelines, build these pipelines. And they're away from their families, they're away from their homes. And one of the, accommodations made for these workers is to provide women to them. So the sexual exploitation of Indigenous women is, like a side benefit to them working these super lucrative jobs in the oil industry. And this infographic also talks about 1 in 4 identified alleged perpetrators were acquitted or never charged. So roughly 25% of the folks who do get any kind of, accusation or actual courtroom justice, 1 in 4 of them, is flat out acquitted or never even charged due to, lack of evidence, lack of inappropriate policing. And I think that's so important to bring up, as I know this series is about race and policing. So, as we talk about, which cases are investigated thoroughly, which cases are, we're using DNA evidence, which cases are really getting, media attention and getting like thorough scrutiny, we know it's not Indigenous women. And that's something that directly ties to a lot of the work with our other communities like Black Lives Matter, about the questioning of, why is all this funding going to police that are not really investigating the crimes that we most care about, and instead are really focusing their energy on criminalizing protesters, many about these pipelines, or criminalizing petty crimes, which are not resulting in thousands of women being murdered or missing. So I think that's
and it looks like we can kill the protesters now and not be punished for it, right? I mean, that's just an indication of how our lives are not worth anything. I just saw James Ramos on television last night opening up an investigation of Sherman Indian, and we always were taught that Sherman Indian School was one of the good ones, right? But there's some indication that there are bodies. There are literal bodies buried of these children who were kidnapped from their communities. And I'll let Stan take over the questioning, but I just wanted to just do a little commercial here. Speaking of missing Indigenous women, there are also thousands of missing Black women. And Soledad O'Brien, who is a journalist, a very well-respected journalist, has developed a documentary which will be on HBO tonight about missing and murdered African-American women. So, the fight is for all of us, how women have been debased in these communities. Men, of course, also, but, women sometimes face a triple jeopardy in terms of how we are treated, not only by people in our community, outside people, but also the courts and the police. And that's precisely what we're getting at in this series. So unless you have a comment, Jim, we're going to go straight to the questions, and maybe you can help us out with the questions.
Well, sure. That's very powerful. Both Marys, I will say. But Mary Valdemar, you started on off as the film did by identifying as a colonial. Is there such a thing as post-colonial problem? And then you take us all the way through to the different centuries, to the man camps, the famous man camps. And you can find it in the Columbian times. Those are all male crews. And they were in a society, a highly well-regulated society that valued its women. In fact, the great Ana Kaona, that I'll be starting some of my recent work up with, married to the very martial leader Kaonabo, remarked on this and actually pays for it with her prices, that they would come, and a lot of the women were either unclothed or barely clothed. So the Europeans saw that, the European males, especially some of the debased crews, simply saw that as being, sexually available. And so they began to attack on a large set of scales, highly documented if you can read through the various accounts. We fast forward to the Virginia colony. People forget that the first two major shiploads were, again, all men. And they were simply predating themselves upon women that could be both in various kinds of not being clothed enough or controlled enough according to the strictures of their own society. And then also in a society where councils of people, often headed up by women, or women could put the leaders in there, had the right to say that this was an unacceptable behavior. You can fast forward from there into the formation of the United States, the Paxton Boys, taking you all the way to the other kinds of boys, regularly sexually predated communities, especially when more of the men would be away. This happened in the Pequot Wars. In fact, they separated men and women. Women and children, kept them often for these kinds of things, and took the men down to the Caribbean. Now this is highly documented, traded them for African descent slaves and brought them on up. Then it happens in the conquest of the Americas, and then California. You actually have in the mission system where girls and sometimes boys, our good friend Julia Mbagani, who has moved on to the spirit world, was telling this to my son one time, at the table, and we were talking about then the girls, which he talked about when in the mission system. A lot of the uprisings, like the one at with the Chumash at La Parisma, were because there's a thing called monjarias, and the monjarias were, and I always go like this: where in the world Where in the world are prepubescent and pubescent girls taken away from the protection of their families and made available to a relatively hostile, almost all male invasive force? Because that's what was happening. So he presented on that in his class, and the class attacked him until they figured out who he was. And that's a real problem too. And so sitting at the table with Julia Bogany, she reminded herself that they would come, as Mary just brought on up, they would find ways to get the families to coming in, grabbing the children, one thing. Another thing is that they found that the children were so valuable that the people wouldn't work as hard. So sometimes they would kill the children to make the people work harder, and they were sexually predating, which is really hard to find in the accounts. And then, so they were talking about girls, and all of a sudden she turns and looks at James Dean and she goes, and the boys, and the boys. Oh, his face just went on over. So you can go fast through the mission system, the genocide that occurred. There were literally, including California governors, that were given girls, especially, of a young age, for whatever they wanted. They were sold, sometimes on auction blocks in Los Angeles and San Francisco. And then you fast forward from there into that was also brought up in your piece here, and that is about the 1880s, 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, when you have the solid formation of reservations. They literally started to pass a set of laws. And this is what both of the scholars, really excellent work that they've done, have learned to give kind of almost a little bit softened version of it. It leads to what they call the Major Crimes Act. And that is where Native peoples, this is Crow Dog ex parte on a separate kind of set of issues. But most Native societies had very clear ways, especially well-regarded women in city and council, especially elder women, well-regarded, had the right almost to overrule all other people on these kinds of issues. We've had the wonderful Mary Louise Defender out there. She even talks about how they literally had words for what they call women's business. So these societies had regulated this very closely. So what they passed was the Major Crimes Act. One of them was rape, the other ones were murder, and other kind. They said, oh, these issues are so terrible that you no longer have jurisdiction. And since then, they took away jurisdiction. Well, then jurisdiction went to the state and the federal government, neither of which was at all interested in practicing any kind of justice, specifically in this area. For Native peoples, and it just go right through the 20th century. And they simply don't have the statistics. It's not until, it's maybe some in the 1970s, but really it's until the 1990s when the national justice statistics come on out. And one of the things they're struggling with was the high amount of violent crimes and victimization crimes toward people of color, especially Black and African Americans, and people brought on out that the statistics were even higher for Native people. The Department of Justice argued, they said, fine, we'll study it. And they were shocked because one things that was really important was that nearly everybody that experienced victimized violent crime experienced it mostly from members of your own population, your own group. And then that's where it starts to get complex, both in terms of policing and community standards. But what they found with Native people, without even starting to go to the sexual assaults and the rapes, was that the majority of the crimes were perpetrated by non-Native. Shocked them all. So they rejected their own findings, did the study again. Maybe the numbers came down a little bit, but not much. This was just shocking. This was just simply not supposed to be, even in the social sciences. And they only had half the numbers. That's actually the 1990s move into the 21st century. And that's when Native women and other people started speaking out. And you think that's bad. So look what's been doing. And so we have lots of cases. I know of at least 2 or 3 on Standing Rock alone when I was working out there, where the state authorities, if they're called, will come in and they simply will not arrest a non-Native, predominantly a white person, especially a white man. Now, we have an astounding case with murder, but if there's a claim of rape or sexual assault, they all but laugh, and they'll often arrest the Native people reporting the crime. That has happened. I was there twice when it happened. So when Native women and girls simply disappear, essentially the outside authority. And the minute you're off that reservation, you lose all jurisdiction rights on the reservation, because the cases I'm bringing on up is where state authorities were called in, and the Indian police, we're seeing some minor advancements here. The Indian police were reluctant, if not forbidden, from countering state police or county police, right? And they just refused to follow this. And one of the things that your sessions have been great about is to demonstrate that no one is collecting the data on what the police are doing, much less investigations, okay, when they're perpetrating crimes. And that's just simply not reported. It's not in the FBI uniform code. It's nowhere. Well, whatever that is, this is much, 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 much worse. So when these numbers start to come on out in the last couple of decades, it shocks people, just like that Justice Report did in the 90s. And that's when people, both in the United States, started to bring this on up. They ultimately had to go around the Congress and go to the United Nations. But a group that really made the advancements was up in Canada, where some of the worst statistics were, by the way. And it was Idle No More. And so people like to say, well, that's the grandmothers, right? And the grandmothers under Idle No More said, we will visit this. And that's when it started to come on out. And so we know of the statistics that we have, this is only a minor proportion of it, and they're easily the worst. So that the Native woman experiencing sexual predation, it's not even until she actually disappears and is possibly missing or murdered that we even begin to hear about it. And to this day, they just had a big reconciliation piece up in Canada. To this day, most of the police forces will not investigate and certainly will, as you say, not charge. And now all that's been linked. And so thank you for bringing that on up because there's been a lot of things said. And there's a lot of good people there at the Sherman School, but ultimately it was and is a boarding school. And that's where these crimes are perpetrated to the extent of destroying the cultures and the ability of the people to stand up for things like this. So,
and Jim, I don't mean to don't mean to interrupt, but I think that's what you all are talking about is just another nail in the coffin of the way we have thought of policing and police. It is policing, which is something we've been talking about for over almost a year and a half now. Was never meant to protect us. I grew up in LA, protect and serve all the time. It was never meant to protect us. It was meant to protect white society from us. And so we're just the collateral damage in all of this. Ignore women, ignore parents who go to the police and say, my kid has been gone for a week and that's not like her, right? And I know that Darby, I think Mary wants to introduce this vision on the screen who's been quiet, and I know you have a lot to say, Darby. So please, Mary, do us the honors.
Yes, let me introduce my friend and colleague and relative in this work, Darby, Osnaya. We've been working together on a lot of local community issues, but one of the things I also want to make sure gets included, in addition to, your mentioning of Black women and the disparity and the numbers there, I want to make sure that we include LGBTQIA plus families. So, Darby, go ahead.
So hello, thank you everyone for having me. Thank you for all the information y'all been sharing. It's preaching to the choir here. Yes. It's so disgraceful. Definitely community care is what we need if we really want to find justice and if we really want to decrease the numbers. We just hosted a Trans Day of Remembrance event on Saturday, which literally knocked me. It just knocked me because this is the first time that I read detailed information about the deaths. So a lot of them were just so heartbreaking that I'm not even going to mention them right now. But it goes along with, especially the majority of them being Black women. So in solidarity with, all women, Black, cisgender, transgender, anybody, even white women, the deaths are still happening and they don't care. But yes, I wanted to share specifically two, because I can go forever, but there's specifically two that have stood out. About 20 years ago, there was a trans teen, Navajo Diné Nation, Fred Martinez. I couldn't find any information if they ever used any other name. I think they would go by FC for, but yes, they were killed. I believe they did find their murderers, but it took forever. There's a documentary on PBS people can watch, I believe, on Amazon Prime as well. And it's great to learn about this information because you also get to know our terms that a lot of our Native relatives, ancestors had for folks. So let me see, what did I write here?
You mentioned in the chat, you mentioned a term that the Dene use for
yes,
two-spirited or three-spirited women.
Yeah, Natslihi. So,
Yeah.
and I could be saying that wrong. I was just barely introduced to that term, but yeah, it's for our folks assigned to male at birth who have a feminine spirit. I'm gonna do some more research to see if they had a term for folks assigned to female at birth who had a male spirit, because I did see that they had 4 genders for the Diné Nation or culture. But yes, that was 20 years ago. It took 10 years for that I can think of for that murder to be resolved, and that was because of community. Then this last year in Pennsylvania, Whispering Wind Bear Spirit, 41-year-old non-binary person who's Shawnee by birth and Potawatomi by relation, they were shot and killed. And their murderer is being charged, I believe, from what I was able to find. But I think it was because if that happened, because they also did a robbery. So I feel like because property was attached to that murder, and that's just my own bias from what everyone's been sharing here, because I feel like had that happened on her reservation, that wouldn't have been the case that they would have found. But I feel that because of robbery, because theft, but last I was able to find was in August, an article that did say that they upped his charge to 2nd-degree murder and it was a white male. So, but as this is happening, and like I said on Saturday to our folks who attended our event, and I say to all of you, like, please, community is as mad as we can get with each other, as much as we may disagree. We are really all we have, community care. We don't have much, we can't trust in the police. We can't trust in the justice system because it was created for white, rich men to stay white and rich. I do also want to honor that I am on Tongva land in Colton, do a lot of work in Kauai and Yuhaviatan land. I am a detribalized Mexican with American nationality, and I go by any and every pronoun. So before I forget to honor the land that I'm in and give anybody, if you want to refer to me as he, she, they, the binary does not bind me. But yes, we do. It's just very heartbreaking. It's very heartbreaking when we see the numbers and we see what's going on. If anyone has any questions, I could answer.
Darby, are you affiliated with a particular group that our students might reach you and have a website or something?
Well, Chica, of course. I'm core-team member of Chica. You could always reach me there.
That's CHICCA or?
Yes.
Yeah, we have the link for the Facebook page, and we can make sure that gets in the chat.
Okay, great.
And
also the email and all that. We'll share that. I wanted to circle back around though to another link that I wanted to share for Tiny House Warriors. And I really want to impress around folks the work that is being done by women around the world to deal with missing and murdered Indigenous women, because it's good for us to be aware of what's happening, but it's even better for us to support the change agents that are literally putting their lives on the line every day to stop this from continuing. Basically, we don't want to have missing and murdered Indigenous women, not just justice or the criminalization of the folks who are acting as predators against them, but actually, to prevent this from happening. And the only way we can do that is by understanding, the deep and real intersection with environmental justice and things like oil pipelines and other, industry and development that makes a profit literally off the death of these women. And so we need to really be that, truthful about that and face that and take a look at that. And Tiny House Warriors, we've been working with them for several years at Chica, and we try to promote them here in the inland region. They were one of the folks present at many of the frontline actions that you've seen across Turtle Island, Standing Rock, Line 3, but their home is at Blue River in Kamloops, Canada, and they're on occupied, unceded Sheswemic territory. Their father was Arthur Manuel, who had been a huge advocate for Native First Peoples in Canada and their sovereignty and their rights to live free on their unceded territory. And his daughters continue that work today, as he passed several years ago. And we have 3 women here who are basically carpenters, women carpenters. And they build tiny houses on the pipeline that is, being built by the Trans Mountain Corporation. And they are essentially stopping this pipeline and the associated man camps by literally refusing to move from their unceded territory and their land. And they do this very openly, and the link is in the chat where you can look at photos of them hanging red dresses all over their territory to make it very clear. If folks are not aware, the red dress is the symbol of the missing and murdered Indigenous women movement. It represents the sexualization of Indigenous, Native, and First People, and the sex industry, and the missing, the red has commonly been for many Indigenous people the symbol of women, the symbol of femininity, the symbol of blood, of power, of our connection to each other and our connection to the earth and our connection to humanity, as creatress, as the protectors and defenders of our families and our communities, and that red is a very powerful symbol. You can see behind me, there's a banner that is often given by missing and murdered Indigenous women when you march with them, when you participate in their actions, and you can only get it by supporting their movement. And Tiny House Warriors, to me, is the best, most fierce example of the women who are literally raising their kids. They call them freedom babies, raising their kids, in this unceded territory. And it's hard living. They're doing it without all the bells and whistles that many of us as untribalized Indigenous people, are used to and benefit from in society. But it's also beautiful and culturally rich and culturally connected to the land. And they're literally being attacked by Canadian police every single day, harassed, filmed, threatened, imprisoned. Like, this is happening now, today, every day it happens to them. And so we ask, as always, that our community stand in deep solidarity with them, support them, like their page, follow their work, share it, make sure that this is not allowed to happen in the dark, that it has to happen in the light so everybody sees what's going on. And we know from past experience, just like with Standing Rock, even though these battles might take years or decades, in the end, we can win. We can win, but we have to expose what's really happening and what the motivation is behind these police, which is not justice, which is not even following the law, because the law says it's unceded territory. They have every right to be there. So they're not even following their own Canadian laws. And that's the thing that we have to keep centering, highlighting, and lifting these women so that they can continue to do this work, that benefits all of us. Because if we can get this done in Canada, then we can get this done here, and we can get this done in all the places it happens across the nation, the Philippines, like pick a continent.
Australia, Hawaii, all of those places. Yeah. We have about 5 minutes left. And Stan, was there a question or two that maybe stood out?
Say that there's just so much devaluation of human beings, and like Darby said, you're talking to the choir, you're preaching to the choir, but the truth of the matter is the story is the same. Those that are in authority are devaluing human beings and not doing what they should be doing, which is the right thing. And so it's a constant battle, and we need to support these groups, and we need to support each other and keep the fight going on. So I think I just wanted to say that. And if anybody wants to have a closing statement, right now would be a good time to do so.
I'd just like to draw attention to some of the things that are shared in the chat. Like there's a movie that came out in, not too recently, but it was really good. It's called Wind River. It's on Amazon Prime. It's like, I think 2017 or something like that. And it's a great film. If you haven't seen it, I strongly encourage you to watch it. It talks very directly and really shows, I think, what is wrong with the police departments that have been investigating these cases. There's a lot of hiding of the facts by the oil companies and the security forces that are often hired mercenaries. So they're military trained, policing that protects the oil man camps. And they often, do not cooperate with the police or with the, native police or, any of the authorities that are supposed to be protecting the communities. And this film gives a really real and stark look at that. And a lot of the investigations that have come about from some of these missing and murdered women cases have also seen local law enforcement killed or threatened with their lives for even trying to investigate these cases. And I think that's an important thing to be aware of. And then also we'll share information how to get involved locally. We do a 5K run here locally for missing and murdered Indigenous women, also for the residential boarding school issues. And we'd love to see everybody come out and support and help generate the funds needed to be able to do legal support and make sure that some of these women, girls, and other community members are found.
And we can certainly do that in this space here. So if you share whatever you share with us, we will disseminate the information. I have no doubt that there are people who are listening right now who can do something about this. We can all do something, even if it's going out and participating in a 5K walk, run, or whatever it is, donations. Jim, did you want to close us out here?
Well, the last couple of times we've met at our Indigenous section at the ASA, they go, "Will the elders say the prayer?" And I'm looking around, and they mean me. Yeah, first of all, Pidamaya, thank you to Jeremy, to Mary, Mary Texeira there, to Stan, for having brought these issues forward. And then a Wopida, honor to you for your work, to Mary Valdemar and Darby and others that have taken on these issues. That's the kind of things that would be recognized in a lot of Indigenous communities, and that has to come forward as a kind of valuing. And then we would often say, people don't like to say goodbye, but they would often say doksha. So doksha means there is agreement here, so we need to move forward on things. We will be together again. And then most of us said, that's just for me anyway, mitakawe yasin, and that means you are all my relations. We are all related. Let us treat each other with that level of respect. So mitakawe yasin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I do want to say how grateful we are. These are not, this is not a comedy. We talk about very, very sad things, but I do want our audience to know and our participants to know that we don't punch down, excuse me. We don't attack Indigenous communities, Black communities, Asian communities. We are looking at power structures here. We are looking at systems of oppression here that we all have in common. So we want you to continue to tune in and to see, what comes next, because we are bound and determined to get the word out from our friends all over the country that we want to see the criminal justice system changed. We want to see policing changed, and we're doing our very best to make it happen. So with that, thank you so much again, everyone. And Darby, you must have your own forum for this. So we'll be in touch with you, because I think there needs to be more discussion of non-binary trans people, especially Native Americans, whom we don't hear anything about. So please keep the lines open. We'll be in touch. And thanks
Yes,
again,
thank
everyone. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.